Hello everyone, this is part 4 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto stared at the older girl for a moment, not that she could really tell due to his eyes being narrowed as they were. Slowly he stood up from his meditative position, gave a small bow to the girl, and made to leave. I apologize, I didn't realize this area was taken. I'll leave you then. He continued to walk off, the jangling of his shakuju the only sound in the relatively small space. The girl just seemed confused at the odd blonde's very polite apology and watched as the monk walked towards the exit of the training ground. However, when she noticed the many split leaves all over the ground as well as a few burned ones, her eyes widened. Wait, Naruto was mildly surprised as he felt a hand wrap around his arm as the girl tugged him back. She held one of the many split leaves in front of him, a small recognizable sparkle in her eyes as she smiled at him. You're practicing wind manipulation ? Naruto nodded once, his usual smile still spread across his features. He crouched to the ground, picking up a leaf before holding it out to the girl. To her amazement, it quickly spit straight down the middle, the cut still slightly jagged, which mildly annoyed Naruto. Oh wow, that was really good. Baki-sensei told me about this, but he won't let me try it yet. She suddenly became shy as she looked down at her feet, noticing the newly split leaf float to the ground as Naruto released it. Sometimes though I sneak out here to try it, but all I can ever get is a tiny cut. Suddenly a mildly suspicious look alighted on her rather pretty features, in Naruto's opinion. Who are you anyway ? One don't recognize you from the academy, I would have remembered your hair. Naruto chuckled at that as he leaned against a tree, for now resting his staff to the side. I'm not from Suna. I'm just traveling, trying to learn all I can about chakra. The other blonde blinked at that. As far as she knew, elemental manipulation was only used by shinobi. So you're like a monk ? Naruto smiled warmly again as he gestured to the staff, which made her slightly embarrassed. I am a monk, this is part of my pilgrimage. The Suna genin now just seemed confused. Only a few minutes with Naruto and she already had more questions than answers. But don't monks just, pray or meditate and stuff ? Naruto slowly slid down the tree to a cross-legged sitting position. It didn't seem like he would be leaving any time soon. Seeing no reason not to, the girl joined him, attempting to copy his sitting position but only managing a loose facsimile. I think you are confusing us with priests, we don't pray. Naruto shook his head, thinking better of that, at least many of us don't. Everybody is entitled to their belief after all. Being a monk is more a way of life than a faith, we simply take up the values of clean living, kindness, and peace. The girl's eyes seemed slightly wider after he finished, the smallest hints of admiration in her eyes that quickly became skeptical. Aren't you a little young ? You seem even younger than I am. Naruto just gave her an easy grin which caught her off guard. She had expected her comment to rile him up slightly, not that she had wanted to exactly. Most people got annoyed when you underestimated them. Like I said, it's a way of life. There is no age limit, only that you understand what you are committing to. I myself am 11. The girl settled at that, although she was still slightly skeptical. That was the age of a fourth-year academy student. My name is Naruto, by the way. The girl was pushed from her thoughts by a hand held out in front of her. After a moment of hesitation she took it, shaking it once. Temari. Again Naruto just gave an easy grin as Temari got into a more comfortable sitting position. It's not for everybody. At that Temari chuckled as she drew her legs underneath her, resting on one hand, the dusty ground seemingly not concerning her. So you're interested in wind manipulation ? Temari nodded enthusiastically as she idly played with a leaf in her hands, concentrating for a moment as a tiny cut appeared where her fingers were holding it. Yeah, my father got me a battle fan when I graduated the academy, so I want to train with it and make him proud. My dream is to be just like Pakura-sama, to be a strong kunoichi like her and earn a name for myself. Naruto gave a small eye smile that had a certain masked shinobi in Konoha sneezing. That is a good goal, I wish you luck. He got up to leave but once again found Temari holding his arm, preventing him from leaving. This made him arch an eyebrow. The other blonde looked down for a moment, seemingly conflicted about what she was about to say. Would you mind helping me? Naruto blinked before suddenly laughing, causing an irritated expression to form on the older blonde's face. Hey, what's so funny? Just because I'm a kunoichi I'm not good enough for you to help? Don't you know how hard it was to ask for help from somebody 2 years younger than you? Naruto stopped himself, wiping away an imaginary tear as he straightened up, his hand waving apologetically. Sorry, it wasn't that, but I'm just amazed you're the second person who has asked me that since I arrived here. Of course I would be happy to offer what help I can. Oh, and the first person to ask for my help was a kunoichi too, so don't go using your gender as an excuse to get angry with people. It's unbecoming. He bent down, picking up a leaf and handing it to the girl before gently placing his hand around hers, causing the older girl to blush. What are you doing? Naruto gave her a disarming smile that made her relax slightly without entirely knowing why. I want you to try to split the leaf. I'm going to see what you are doing. I can read your chakra through contact. Temari seemed unsure. She had heard of sensor ninja before but never ones that required contact. It seemed impractical. Even so she began to channel chakra into the leaf, doing her best to change it into wind nature based on what information she had gotten from a few older genin and chunin. Sure enough, a tiny slice appeared where her fingers gripped the leaf, which made the girl deflate. It looked so pathetic compared to all the completely split leaves littering the ground. Alright, I think I see your problem. Temari looked up before her face took on a hint of red as she noticed Naruto was still holding her hand. The younger boy barely noticed as he was more focused on what he had felt and was looking off to the side. You are trying to convert your chakra into wind while it is still inside your body. You need to be doing that at the moment it is released, not too much before or after. Try it again and keep that in mind. Doing her best to combat her growing blush, Temari accepted another leaf handed to her before repeating the technique. Naruto was pleasantly surprised as he felt her chakra begin to shift into a specific nature just before she released it into the leaf. Temari was far more ecstatic as she saw the leaf split 3/4 of the way through. It was a rather rough, jagged cut, but it was a marked improvement. Wow, that was amazing, just one hint and I improved so much. She gave the younger blonde a gleaming grin, and suddenly Naruto was the one who found a tad more color in his cheeks. He had thought of Matsuri as cute before, but Temari was most certainly very pretty. He was broken from his slight daze as he saw a hand waving in front of his face and a confused Temari staring at his blank expression. Yeah, that was really good, but you are letting your chakra build up before you release it. That can be quite dangerous when you are shifting the element. Once you convert chakra to a different element, it becomes harder to control because it is not entirely yours anymore. You have opened it up to the element itself. You need to release it as a continuous flow, but this will come with practice. Temari smiled and nodded. After being helped so much, she was about ready to take the blonde's words as gospel. However, a frown momentarily marred her brow. What do you mean it's dangerous? Naruto thought for a moment for a way to describe it before looking up. Just because you perform a jutsu, does that mean you are immune to its effects? Temari quickly shook her head in the negative. Her sensei had stressed that many more tactically minded shinobi would use their opponent's strengths to their advantage. Well then, it's no different to the chakra that makes up the technique. While not impossible, it is highly difficult to control an unpredictable element like lightning or wind inside one's body. Temari just nodded at the logic. She found Naruto to be a very good teacher. He found simple ways to explain things. Now if you want to improve the smoothness of the cut, he picked up another leaf and split it quickly, holding it up to compare with Temari's. You need to focus on sharpening your chakra. Imagine it like two of the finest swords scraping against one another, sharp and fine. Temari once again nodded before grabbing a few leaves and retreating further away into the training ground. Naruto returned to his meditative position before fishing out one of the scrolls Matsuri had given him. A few hours passed as Naruto calmly continued to read his scroll about chakra. There wasn't a lot he didn't already know, but it was still interesting. Over that time he had heard many cries of success as well as irritated shouts of frustration. In either case they brought small smiles to his lips. He was sure Sora and Temari would have much to talk about, both being avid wind enthusiasts. He briefly wondered how a confrontation would go but was interrupted as he felt somebody shake his shoulders. He looked up to see Temari, a victorious and self-satisfied smile on her face as she held a leaf in front of her. She put it between both of her palms before gaining a look of intense concentration. After a few moments she looked up and opened her palms. Between them, cut down the middle with very wonky and jagged line, was the leaf. However, Naruto was very much impressed. She had managed to completely split the leaf. Her affinity to wind must be incredibly strong. I did it. Naruto returned the beaming grin Temari was giving him with a smaller, more reserved one of his own. That's wonderful, you improved really quickly. Temari just gave a small snort of agreement as she plopped down next to the seated monk. Yeah, but I couldn't have gotten nearly this far without your help. Naruto gave a small conceding nod before grinning. All you have to do now is work on straightening your cut and doing it without having to concentrate so much and you'll be ready to move on to the next stage. I'm sure your sensei will be very surprised. Temari almost gleamed as he said that before looking across at the blonde curiously. There's a next step ? The younger blonde gave a small nod as he began to absently draw out a waterfall with the end of his shakuju. Yes, you have to split a waterfall with your chakra. Temari gulped at that as she saw Naruto sketch out a small stickman in the sand underneath the waterfall. This first stage was about control and precision. The next stage is about power and maintaining a steady, constant stream of wind chakra. Temari seemed daunted by such an imposing task while Naruto appeared nonplussed. It's getting late. Temari was roused from her trepidation as she looked up. Sure enough, the sun was beginning to dip over behind the buildings. Oh, I have to get home. She shot to her feet and began to race towards the entrance of the training ground. However, she suddenly turned and waved. Will I see you again? Naruto shrugged with a lopsided smile. Hey, anything can happen. Temari smiled cutely before turning and running back home, leaving an amused blonde to puzzle how he managed to get into these situations. It turned out Naruto did see Temari again, more than a few times, seeing as it was her training ground and Naruto didn't bother to move. After the first day though, there wasn't really much he could actively help her with besides a few pointers. Steadily they both improved, Naruto slightly faster due to starting earlier, his better chakra control and understanding the nature of wind chakra better thanks to his reading. He had recommended Temari read as well, but she was more the type to learn by repeated practice, very much like Sora and how Naruto used to be. He still learned mainly by that method, but now he liked to try and understand what he was doing better. One day, about a week into their strange meetings, Temari brought her fan along. Naruto hadn't known what to expect when the older blonde mentioned her battle fan, but he hadn't been expecting an enormous steel bar that was as tall as the girl was herself. However, as he expected, the girl had quite a bit of difficulty moving the enormous wind weapon. Suddenly Naruto had something new to teach her. Slowly Temari got the hang of reinforcing her muscles with chakra as well as timing bursts of energy to increase the power behind her swings. So she was able to swing the large fan around as if it were made of paper like its more traditional counterparts. Apparently her father had been incredibly impressed when she had shown him, but thankfully she heeded the blonde's advice and didn't mention the monk. When Naruto had found out her father was the Kazekage himself, he wasn't entirely sure what to think. It didn't particularly change his opinion of the girl like Temari had expected. He believed everybody was their own person, regardless of who their parent were. The older blonde was pleased by that. Usually people would avoid her due to her being the honored daughter of Yondaime-sama. Of course there was another glaring reason why people avoided her, but that had nothing to do with her father. Naruto didn't neglect his time with Matsuri either, but between her time at the academy and Temari's obligations with missions, he didn't see either as much as they both probably wanted. So far the two had yet to meet thanks to some strategic planning on the blonde's part. He wasn't sure how the shinobi of the village or the Kazekage himself would react to him giving pointers or, in some cases, jutsu, to the girls, especially as one was his daughter. He wanted to keep his involvement as quiet as possible, and that meant keeping his two students apart. One day he was just finishing up a scroll that he was particularly captivated with. It described old Suna shinobi using techniques known as free-form wind manipulation, what used to be the highest caliber in that discipline. It involved saturating the area in wind chakra that the shinobi would then directly control with their chakra. No hand seals were involved. However, due to the difficulty, Large reserves required and years of dedicated training necessary. It had become a dead art. There was nobody in the village that still used it or even attempted it anymore, and only a handful of shinobi had ever managed it. Suddenly he was interrupted as somebody new landed in the training ground. Luckily he was underneath the shade of a tree, the sun at his back, hiding him from sight somewhat. The newcomer, a boy perhaps a year older than him with spiky brown hair and an almost perpetual scowl on his features, immediately made their way over to Temari. The girl had been dutifully practicing the leaf-cutting exercise but quickly hid the results behind her, not wanting anybody to find out about her training just yet. Naruto saw the two speak in hushed but urgent tones before both raced off suddenly back towards the village. Knowing he wasn't going to get anything done now that he was curious, Naruto got up and followed after them quietly, once again silencing his shakuju. It didn't take Naruto long to lose them in the midst of Suna's winding streets and throngs of people. He had gotten used to the village somewhat, but Temari and the other boy had moved off at shinobi paces and Naruto didn't want to draw attention to himself. However, soon he noticed the streets becoming quiet as less and less people moved about outside. Continuing to walk in that direction, he soon found himself completely alone on the streets, which was odd as the sun was only just beginning to move past the horizon. More people should have been out. He finally reached a small park enclosed on all sides by buildings. It was more a strip of bare land really, just a sandy space with no buildings. At the center of the park was a lone boy, probably around the same age as Naruto was. Curious as to why the boy was out here all alone, Naruto approached him, now able to pick details. He had dull red hair, closer to brown really, framing a set of teal-green eyes and pale white skin. There were strange black rings around the boy's eyes that reminded the blonde of his own whisker marks. Most curiously, the kanji for love was seemingly tattooed on the boy's forehead above his left eye in bright red. He was sitting cross-legged with his hands in his lap, just staring ahead into space almost lifelessly. Occasionally he would mutter something Naruto couldn't quite make out in a low gravelly tone. Slowly Naruto settled down into a seated position of his own across from the boy, neither saying anything for a while. After a minute or two Naruto closed his eyes, somewhat enjoying the perfect quiet that permeated the area. He had missed this from the temple, unable to find many places of solace in the bustling shinobi village. "Why are you here?" ? The other boy's voice finally shattered the comfortable silence Naruto had lapsed into, his grave voice sounding emotionless. This seemed like as good a spot as any to meditate. It is rare to find such solitude in a village like this. The other boy looked up, regarding Naruto coolly with bloodshot eyes. It was apparent he hadn't slept in some time. "People avoid me, they know better than to come near me. Their blood stains my sand when they do." Naruto looked up, his eyes opening slightly. He wasn't naive, he saw the redhead slowly push his chakra into the sand around them. The time he had spent meditating, he had been absorbing it all in a meter radius. There was something about the boy's chakra that was familiar to him. The only way to describe it would be a less potent version of his own. "Why?" Gaara blinked once, his face still an emotionless mask. Naruto wasn't sure if that was to do with his mindset or whatever the thin layer of chakra covering his body was. "Mother demands their blood and doing so proves my existence." Naruto nodded slowly, as if he were accepting the statement at face value, actually mildly surprising the redhead. "You think killing proves your existence? That taking a life somehow increases the value of your own? The redhead growled suddenly as the sands around him began to writhe violently, save for a small circle around Naruto where they were perfectly still. "If mother demands it, then I must do as she says." Other. The boy suddenly gripped his head right over the tattoo. He was obviously in pain as he began to mumble to himself in hushed, apologetic tones. As suddenly as it happened, it seemed to stop. The boy looked back up, murder in his eyes as he glared at the blonde. Naruto continued to calmly observe all of this, not particularly straining himself to absorb the chakra in the sand around him. That was the great thing about the Preta path. It wasn't like normal jutsu. The more he used it, the more energized he felt, and he could vent excess chakra directly into the ground. This of course had the added benefit of acting like a buffer to the other boy's chakra, making it more difficult for him to affect the sand. This silent staring match as the two boys asserted the dominance without words lasted for about another minute. Although it felt considerably longer. Finally the other boy let out a grin, and even though it didn't even hold a drop of warmth, Naruto returned it. Mother says you are strong, she wants to see your eyes. She screams at me to rip open your eyes. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that, curious now to who this mother was and how she was so well informed. Suddenly long tendrils of sand lashed out at Naruto, obviously aiming to crush him into the ground. However, just like before, as soon as they came within a certain distance of him they fell limply to the ground, disintegrating into the lifeless sand grains they should be before being reflected by some sort of invisible barrier. You are strong, but you cannot deny Mother her desired blood. The boy continued to throw attack after attack at Naruto, who remained perfectly still, focusing on keeping his sand out of range of him. You know, I don't even know your name. The other boy paused in a rare lull of violence as the sand began to sway more neutrally. I am Gaara no Sabaku. Naruto chuckled slightly as another sand whip fell uselessly to the ground around him. What an appropriate moniker. I am Naruto Uzumaki, could you please stop attacking me now? It seemed Gaara somewhat saw the futility in his actions. Nothing he was doing could even faze the blonde. It unnerved the redhead. The only person who did not fear him like this was his father. The two shared that same unsettling calm while in his presence. The only difference was that Naruto's expression was warm while his father's was eternally cold. Why do you not fear me, Uzumaki? For once Gaara's voice lacked the bloodthirsty edge. There was genuine curiosity in his words. What reason do I have to ? The redhead blinked in surprise. The blonde was right, none of his attacks had even come close to affecting him. How are you so strong? Naruto sighed, but the smile never left his face, behind his cheery demeanor though he was alert. He knew the boy in front of him was obviously anything but stable, and to let his guard down now would be foolish. He may have been kind and wanted to help the boy, but he was anything but an idiot. Chiraku had seen fit to beat that out of him quickly enough. That is a difficult question to answer. Some might say it is due to circumstances out of my control, or maybe it is in my blood? One like to think it is because I train hard to better myself. Gaara shook his head, looking like a dog unsatisfied with a meal. No. What drives you? What allows you to be so strong? Naruto blinked before looking down in thought. Gaara used the opportunity to try and attack the blonde again, but the attempts were quickly rebuked. I want to understand. Gaara's attacks all stopped at once as the redhead once again regarded Naruto carefully. What do you mean? Naruto looked up, a kind smile adorning his features. I wish to understand the world, people, chakra. I want to learn and know these things. To do so I have to grow stronger. To understand people is to understand the world, and it is only through understanding will we reach peace. I don't want to see the people who are precious to me get hurt or suffer, so I have to understand in order to strive for peace. Gaara looked down at that, his hair shadowing his eyes as he seemed to contemplate the words. Prove it to me. His words were nothing but a whisper, barely carried by the breeze over to Naruto. Prove to me that your method of gaining power is superior. I fight because I refuse to let my existence be erased. Now prove it to me. Fight me, Uzumaki. Even as Naruto watched, the sand around Gaara began to congregate, draw together as if by some unseen will. Now Naruto finally understood. The thin shell around Gaara's body prevented him from seeing, but now, as the sand began to form into some misshapen creature, he could see it all too clearly. Gaara was a Jinchuriki like him. The signs were all there. Flowing through the sand was the same red chakra that Naruto had and Sora once possessed. However, it was not as thick or as potent as the Kyuubi's chakra, not surprising considering it had to be a less powerful Beiyu inside of him by default. Naruto sighed slowly. Right now he was looking into a mirror of what he might have been. He could only imagine what must have happened to Gaara to make him this way. It was also obvious his Beiyu was affecting him. No doubt this mother he spoke of. I don't intend to fight you, Gaara. The redhead just laughed maniacally, drool beginning to drop from his extended mouth as his features took on the likeness of a raccoon. Naruto had done his research since finding out about his status as a Jinchuriki. What he was looking at was the vessel of the Ichibi no Tanuki, the one tail. It's not your choice. Now mother wants your blood. Naruto knew this was a problem. Gaara had begun to leak off his Bijuu's chakra in droves. Naruto was doing his best to absorb it from the air, but he knew it was only a matter of time before this was investigated. Unfortunately, that meant he had to make this quick. Very well, I am sorry then. Naruto calmly raised a single hand as Gaara's long sandy tail began to sway menacingly, the point sharpened in preparation of impaling the blonde. Naruto opened his eyes fully for quite possibly the first time since arriving in Sunagakure no Sato, but in his bloodlust Gaara wasn't even paying attention. One of the rings around his eyes suddenly seemed to contract slightly as a rush of intense chakra moved through his body. Shinra Tensei. He didn't even shout the name of the technique, so Gaara was all the more oblivious as he was suddenly struck by an incredible, invisible force. His feet remained firmly stuck to the ground by chakra he had already been channeling, but a great deal of his protective sand layer had been blown off, enough to expose Gaara's body. Just as calmly Naruto raised his other hand up. This time instead of his palm being flat out it was cupped slightly. Banshu Tenon. Focusing on the small redhead as opposed to the mass of sand recongregating on his body, Naruto gently pulled his hand back an inch. The effect was immediate as Gaara suddenly flew forward, his eyes wide in shock as his sand cloak was left where it was, twitching slightly in confusion. This confusion meant he could do nothing, nor could his sand react fast enough as he suddenly found himself being held up by Naruto in one hand. The blonde suddenly dropped the frightened redhead, which left him sprawled out on the ground, his eyes fearfully looking up at Naruto. It only lasted a second before Naruto gently pressed the end of his staff against the Jinchuriki's forehead. Immediately Gaara found he could not move, his whole body was paralyzed, he couldn't even move his eyes or speak. Even so, the sheer terror in his eyes as Naruto walked over and crouched down beside him was unmistakable. I am not going to hurt you, Gaara, but at the same time I cannot allow you to hurt me. Don't worry, this paralysis will wear off in about an hour, or I can release it myself if you promise to calm down. Surprisingly, there was no hint of patronization in his voice and his expression only spoke of genuine concern. Gaara had never felt so vulnerable in his life. Here this boy could end his life with less effort than it would take to scrape dirt from his sandal, and Gaara didn't even have his sand armor. Naruto didn't wait for a response as he once again tapped Gaara on the forehead with his staff. Why? Naruto regarded Gaara for a moment as he got back up, the sands immediately swarming to him and congealing back into his ultimate defense. Because we share a common burden, and I know better than anybody that you don't deserve any more suffering. Suddenly the two were interrupted as a Suna shinobi dropped down from a nearby rooftop, looking hesitantly at Gaara and suspiciously at Naruto. Gaara, you will go see your father immediately. The redhead looked at the man for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly before widening in shock. Naruto had placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, the sand falling away harmlessly at his touch. His automatic defense hadn't even quivered at the blonde's approach, and for the first time in his entire life Gaara felt the warmth of human contact. He looked to Naruto with an amazement that was only mirrored by the shinobi standing there watching, and after a moment of deliberation he turned and walked off. When he was gone, Naruto turned his attention to the older shinobi who had interrupted. He was a tall man with the standard attire for a Suna Junin, with the addition of a white linen veil covering half of his face. In turn the man glared at the monk, simultaneously trying to ascertain his motives and understand exactly what he just did. Finally, with a look of resolution, the man nodded curtly before gesturing after Gaara's retreating form. I believe the Kazekage will also want to speak with you. Naruto gave a calm nod before gesturing for the man to lead the way, which he did after a small frown flickered across his features. The two moved at a reasonable pace through the still quiet streets of Suna, Naruto's staff jingling with each step. The Junin accompanying him cast him glances every now and then, to check he was still there, or for some other reason the blonde wasn't sure. Naruto was thinking about what the Kazekage might talk to him about, or what he wanted to say to the Kazekage. He may be a monk, but he knew if a Kage suspected somebody of being a danger to their village, they would not hesitate to deal with that problem. Sadly, he knew that applied to the Hokage as well, one of the reasons his thoughts on Konoha were so mixed right now. So why did you wait so long? The blonde's voice cut through the evening air like a knife, shattering the uneasy silence that had settled there despite his warm tone. The shinobi just looked down at him for a moment before looking ahead, either ignoring the monk or confused by his words. You know, when my chakra touched Gaara's, I could sense everything his sand was connected to, including you hiding up on the rooftop. It had been a rather odd experience at first, suddenly having his senses stretched out as his chakra connected with the Ichibi Jinchurikis. I don't know what you mean. Naruto ignored the comment. He had definitely felt the Junin hiding up on the rooftop. he had been there since Gaara had begun to partially transform. I wonder if you were under orders not to interfere. They continued walking at the same steady pace, but the glances Naruto was getting were less frequent. Maybe you were curious, it is a rather fundamental human desire to know more. Again he got no reaction from the stoic Junin as they continued to lashingly wind through the streets. Perhaps you were simply afraid, although of what I am not sure. That time Naruto got a reaction, a subtle flex of the older man's hands that denoted his irritation. Learning body language had come quite quickly to Naruto at the temple. It was not only a useful skill to pick up, it was great when trying to ascertain somebody's motives. When you lived in a compound filled with people all wearing the same thing and most having shaven head, it was helpful to know so you could identify people. There was also the fact that monks tended to be rather calm and collected people, and for Naruto to annoy somebody he had to know what they were feeling. Naruto wasn't sure why they had taken this rather slow, civilian pace. He could very easily hop across rooftops like shinobi could. Using chakra to enhance one's muscles to run faster and jump higher as well as using it to stick to surfaces was pretty fundamental. It was part of the process of controlling the chakra running through one's body. Monks did this primarily to slow their body's internal functions like heart rate, breathing and metabolism, allowing them to meditate for hours or even days on end. Naruto even knew a man who had perfected it to the point where, if he stayed unmoving, he could meditate for a month between meals with no ill effects. He put it down to either the shinobi underestimating him, not knowing about his skills, or not wanting Naruto to know that he knew about his skills. Either way, the monk was fairly content to just amble on. Besides the man, they were in a part of Suna Naruto hadn't been around much, so it was nice to take it all in while the streets were quiet like this. That was another thing, even when the streets in a shinobi village were empty, there would still be activity from the ninja. Tonight Naruto saw nothing, no chakra signatures, no roof-hopping shinobi, nothing. It was curious. My name is Naruto, by the way. The Junin looked around briefly, staring at the blonde for a few seconds with narrowed eyes before turning back around. Baki. It was more of a grunt than a word. It was clear the man didn't enjoy Naruto's company. The blonde simply raised a brow, so this was Temari's sensei. Finally the pair made it to probably the largest building in Suna, the enormous spherical structure bearing the kanji for wind, which told Naruto it was the Kazekage Tower, at least if things worked the same here as they did in Konoha. He had been outside of this building a few times before but never inside. The monk liked to consider it a new opportunity presenting itself. With a smile Naruto quickly followed Baki through the various corridors and stairs of the large structure, somewhere towards the middle. Naruto assumed it was for making protecting the Kazekage easier, more walls between him and potential threats. The idea seemed laughable to Naruto. The cage was supposed to be the strongest in the village, wasn't he? Finally they were stopped outside of a door by a young pretty assistant who looked at the blonde for a moment before motioning to his shakuju. No weapons in the Kazekage office. She reached out to take it, but Naruto withdrew his hand slightly, making both Baki and the other shinobi, hidden in the shadows, tense. I wouldn't touch her if I were you. She's a little temperamental about who holds her. The assistant simply stared at him incredulously for a moment but relaxed as Naruto simply set the long staff against a wall. He had given the warning. What happened after that was not his concern. He was quickly patted down to make sure he wasn't carrying any more weapons, which once again made the blonde roll his eyes, not that anybody could see. You can go in now. Despite the various annoyances, Naruto smiled amicably at the woman before once again following Baki into the room. Naruto had to admit the room itself was rather nice. The walls were painted a calming violet with various pictures across the walls, mostly scenery shots of Suna and the surrounding desert. A large ornate desk sat towards the back of the room. Sat behind it was a middle-aged man staring at him with curiosity, yet he exuded an air of power and confidence. He had rusty brown hair that spiked out. It was more controlled than his son's, but there was no mistaking the resemblance between this man and Gaara. The revelation that Temari was the Jinchuriki's sister came as a bit of surprise. She had never even once mentioned a brother. Passing those thoughts for now, Naruto moved to the center of the room before bowing slightly. It was enough to show the appropriate level of submission, but not to the point of being sarcastic or a sycophant. The man seemed like the type who needed to feel secure as the strongest in the room. Kazekage-sama, I'm honored you would call for me. The man's studious eyes took in Naruto's form without missing a single detail. his gaze hovering over the blonde's narrowed eyes for a moment. Finally he seemed somewhat satisfied and turned to Baki, who had taken up a rigid position in the corner of the room. You did not mention the boy was a monk. Baki subtly gulped, but the action was definitely not lost on anybody in the room. Apologies Kazekage-sama. The powerful man's gaze only lingered on the nervous man for a single second before returning to the blonde in front of him. What is your interest in my son? Naruto blinked at the bluntness of the question. Then again he rationalized this was hardly a meeting between Kage or Daimyo where subtleties were traded like kunai on a battlefield. As far as the Kazekage was concerned, Naruto was nothing more than a monk with some interesting abilities. I have no more interest in your son Kazekage-sama than I do in any other person where we can exchange polite conversation and even words of wisdom. The man's eyebrows raised slightly at that. The blonde's words were smooth and the man detected no hint of a lie. Why did you approach him in the first place? Naruto continued to smile warmly, his eyes remaining as narrowed as ever. I saw a boy my own age alone in a park. Like any inquisitive person, I wanted to understand why he was alone. Again the Kazekage was pleasantly surprised by the slick answer. The blonde seemed to answer honestly, yet his words were vague. Would you have still approached the boy had you known he has killed multiple time? To the man's slight disappointment, Naruto didn't even bat an eye at that, seeming no more concerned than if he had told him Gaara's hobby was cultivating cacti. It is unfortunate the events that lead to a man killing, yet condemning him before you attempt to understand why a man does what he does is just as bad as allowing him to perform the deed itself. The Kazekage again raised a brow as he detected what could have been a jab at his abilities to watch over his son, yet the monk's words hid that well. Anyway, from what I saw, Gaara's-san acts in self-defense or in the presence of what he perceives as a threat. Am I right? Upon the Kazekage not answering him, Naruto took that as a yes. Plus, I don't believe you can truly blame him. I'm sure I would be tightly wound if I had an 8-story tanuki whispering in my ear all day. At that everybody in the room tensed, besides Naruto of course, while the ruler of Suna continued to observe him carefully, finding the monk increasingly interested. And what would you mean by that? Naruto chuckled slightly, noticing Baki narrow his eyes at the perceived lack of respect from the periphery of his vision. Please Kazekage-sama, I may be young but I am not naive. This is not my first encounter with a Jinchuriki. That wasn't a total lie, at least. Sora was technically one. From his attacks and the fact we are in the desert makes it likely he contains the Ichibi no Tanuki. Kazekage seemed impressed. For once a young to make such an astute observation, about such a rare subject no less, was remarkable. And knowing this makes you see him no differently? Naruto finally showed an emotion other than calm serenity as he raised an eyebrow in slight amusement. As far as I understand it, drawing a storage seal on one's stomach does not turn him into a kunai. The Kazekage leaned forward in his chair, steepling his fingers as he gazed at Naruto intently. I suppose you are right, young monk. Naruto nodded in a slightly exaggerated show of appreciation that only served to make the man before him amused rather than angry. If I may, Kazekage. After a few more seconds of intense staring, the spiky-haired man nodded curtly. Why has nothing been done about Gaara's condition? There was silence in the office for a few moments as the man seemed to weigh up his response, that, or he enjoyed making people wait to assert his dominance. Neither would have surprised Naruto from what he had seen so far. Gaara is a shinobi of this village. He will continue to be so until his usefulness as a weapon that can be used to protect this village ceases. Other than that, I have no real reason to tell you anything, monk. You may be a spy, most likely from Konoha with that fire emblem on your robes. You are only standing here out of my grace and curiosity. Many have never received the honor nor never will. Naruto just continued to smile, outwardly unconcerned by the information, inwardly rather bored by the back and forth. He may have been tempered by the temple, but he was still an 11-year-old and politics would only interest him as long as it was relevant. I am from the Fire Temple in Hai no Kuni. I proudly wear this symbol to both honor my home and my master, just as any shinobi proudly adorns the symbol for his village on his headband. The Kazekage merely nodded absently with a rather dismissive flick of his hand that actually rather irked Naruto. He would have thought a Kage of all people would have understood the importance of a symbol. In either case, I want you to stay away from my son. If my shinobi ever see you approach him, I will not hesitate in removing you from my village. Understood, monk of High no Kuni ? The blonde tilted his head slightly as his smile widened a little, unsettling the Junin in the corner at how calm somebody so young could be in the presence of a cage. Of course, Kazekage-sama. With that, the leader of Suna motioned for him to leave as his eyes drifted back to the paperwork on his desk. As Naruto reached the door, though, the man called out in a calm and perfectly level voice, not even looking up from his work. That includes my daughter Naruto Uzumaki. At that, the blonde paused in his step, if only for the slightest of moments, causing the Kazekage to smirk ever so slightly. Outside the office, Naruto and Baki found a curious sight. The assistant lay sprawled out on the ground, softly snoring with sweat covering her body. Naruto's shakuju lay to the side of her, thankfully not touching her, as well as Asuna Chunin, who was in a similar state. The rest of the people in the room were staring at the simple wooden staff like it was cursed, while Naruto simply sighed deeply. I told her she was temperamental, nobody ever just takes me for my word. Without another word, he reached forward and picked up the staff, raising a brow at the collective intake of breath from the others in the room. However, when Naruto didn't even seem concerned by the demon shakuju, he got a few strange looks before everybody cautiously returned to what they were doing. Naruto turned back to Baki to see if he would be escorted from the building, but was surprised instead found himself looking into a set of teal-green eyes. He wasn't the only one. Naruto had never seen a room clear so fast before, the people looking terrified of the young Jinchuriki as they hurried from the room. A few were even shooting Naruto piteous looks even as they themselves fled from Gaara's sight. Naruto noticed the boy now supported a large gourd on his back, which he could see was laced with incredible amounts of chakra. The two simply stared at one another, neither saying a word, while Baki watched from the side, waiting to see what Naruto would do. Surprisingly, Gaara gave a small inclination of his head with slightly narrowed eyes before walking on into the building. Both Naruto and Baki raised an eyebrow at that, but it was the Junin who let out a small sigh of relief. The wind user would never admit it to anybody, but Gaara scared him. In fact, the only people that weren't scared of the Jinchuriki were his father, due to his ability to suppress Shukaku, and Naruto, who simply seemed unnaturally calm in these situations. After a moment of silence, Baki realized Naruto was looking at him oddly before he remembered why he was still here. He motioned with his hand for the blonde to follow him, and Naruto did after giving a small but warm smile. Baki continued to watch him as they left. It was just unnatural. The next few days were rather amusing for the blonde. The Kazekage had seen fit to reward him with an entourage, from the shadows of course. The blonde had been finally allowed to let his prankster side out a little after suppressing it for too long. He rather enjoyed the memories he got every night as his shadow clone would dispel. They varied from wandering around the village to meditating for hours, but that wasn't the point. It was the satisfaction from knowing his watchers were bored out of their minds every day watching him do absolutely nothing. In the meantime, Naruto would continue to go to his out-of-the-way training ground to read and occasionally train Matsuri in whatever she asked of him, as long as he believed she wouldn't hurt herself. She continued to be an attentive and diligent pupil, soaking up information and instructions with enthusiasm and determination. Honestly, he believed her to be a better shinobi than the fools chasing around a clone all day without a clue. He knew the feeling of being underestimated, and it irked him to no end. Usually because it was about his height or age. However, he also understood when such things were useful, now being one of those times. Nobody expected that he was able to form fully functioning and solid clones, and if they even suspected, the fact he could maintain it all day convinced them otherwise. It should have been an impossible feat for a normal 11-year-old. He got that from Matsuri, who could maintain a single clone for about 5 minutes before needing a recharge. Of course, Naruto was no normal 11-year-old. Strangely though, today he wasn't met in his training ground by Matsuri, or even Temari, although he expected the girl had been warned away from him by her father. He felt his chakra in the sand beneath him intruded upon long before Gaara even came into view. Curiously, he neither sensed nor saw any kind shinobi presence around the young Jinchuriki. It made him wonder just how unstable the boy was if people weren't even willing to watch the village weapon. Uzumaki. Naruto gave a small inclination of his head as Gaara sat down opposite from him, maintaining about 5 meters between them. The atmosphere was slightly tense despite Naruto's warm smile and Gaara's contemplative silence. Both boys were wary of the other's power. Gaara. Again there was silence as Naruto maintained his meditative pose and Gaara just stared at him. If the blonde wasn't so well controlled, he might have found it creepy. However, he knew Gaara was simply socially awkward through no fault of his own. Why did you ask the Kazekage about me? Naruto raised an eyebrow when Gaara did not refer to the man as his father, but considering how the man felt about his son, he should not have been all that surprised they didn't share a healthy father-son relationship. Because like I said, I want to understand you. Gaara narrowed his eyes. He obviously was not all that satisfied with the answer. What did you mean we share a burden? Naruto simply smiled amicably, but with his staff he began to draw out the kanji for 9 with his shakuju almost absently. Gaara just observed with his usual emotionless facade. However, the blonde did notice his eyes widen for just a fraction of a second. So that is why you are so powerful. Naruto gave a small chuckle, his eyes crinkling even more than they usually did. I know your ability to sense people's chakra through your sand. Did I use any that was not my own? To anybody outside the conversation, the question would sound rather inane. Gaara simply stayed silent as he mulled that over. Then what is it? One have to know so that I can weigh your existence against my own. Naruto sighed as he stood to his feet, for once his face losing the slightly fake serene smile as he looked to the ground. I have already told you, Gaara, I am strong because I cannot afford not to be. There are people I find precious, and if I am unable to protect them, either by losing my life or being unable to find the peace that would bring them safety, then I have failed not only myself, but them as well. I hold their hopes on my shoulders right alongside my own, and it is a burden that I gladly carry and would never allow to be dropped. Gaara continued to stare at him, the sand rising up around him to push him into a standing position. So you fight for the people you care about, the people you love? The concept seemed alien to the redhead, even as he was saying it like he couldn't quite understand the concept. Well, Gaara? The Ichibi Jinchuriki looked up to see Naruto staring at him levelly, his staff in one hand with his other hanging loosely by his side. Do you intend to fight me? Naruto could already feel the sand beneath him begin to writhe. It seemed with Gaara's permission or not, the Bayu inside of him seemed incredibly eager to fight. No. Even the way Gaara said that sounded unsure, as if he doubted his own voice. Naruto only offered him a small friendly smile as he once again returned to a seated position. Good. He could now see the intense emotions running through Gaara's mind as his emotionless mask dropped, shattered like his sand armor. It was obvious the boy felt incredibly conflicted, but Naruto couldn't be sure if that was within himself or with his Bayu. Every few moments or so he would grip his head as if in great pain, but it seemed he was fighting it, refusing the voice that had preyed on his fears and desires from a young age. How would you like to sleep, Gaara? The redhead suddenly looked up, surprise and shock now evident in his wide, bloodshot eyes. That's right, isn't it? The voice keeps you awake? Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly as he saw another flicker of emotion dance across the boy's face. No, that's not it. You're afraid of falling asleep. Finally the blonde understood as a sympathetic gleam reached his eyes, smiling sadly at his fellow Jinchuriki. That's it though, isn't it? You aren't as uncaring as you try to appear. If you were, you would have no trouble with going to sleep and relinquishing control to the Ichibi. Naruto stood up and walked towards Gaara slowly, gently crouching down in front of the boy before placing a hand on his shoulder. Gaara saw it coming this time but still flinched at the contact he wasn't used to. You still have the capacity to care about people, Gaara, love more than just yourself. The blonde sighed deeply as he once again rose to his full, if unimpressive height. Remember, Gaara, if you live only for yourself, you will die by yourself. He offered out a hand towards his fellow container, who simply stared at the appendage as if it were being offered by some incomprehensible alien life form. You could find a way to let me sleep? Naruto just gave one small smile as he closed the distance and clasped Gaara's hand in his own. I promise, and I never go back on my promises. Gaara stared between him and the hand being offered before offering the first weak smile he had ever given since the death of his uncles. Thank you, Uzum, he blinked suddenly before tightening his grip on the blonde's hand and staring into his eyes. Thank you, Naruto. The blonde merely gave a foxy grin. Naruto quietly sat in his customary meditative position, his back leaned up against a tall tree in a clearing not too far from the edge of the forest he was in. It had been 6 days since his departure from Suna, and in that time he had crossed the deserts back towards Hai no Kuni before camping out in a forest on the border of Kase no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni. Currently he was unmoving, still to the world around him as his consciousness was elsewhere. So my esteemed jailer returns, I had begun to thought you had forgotten me. The only response the giant fox received was a light chuckle and a small jingle that froze the bayou in place. You say it like I could ever forget the very large and very angry fox in my stomach. The blonde cast a curious eye up the fox for a moment. Speaking of which, did you get big? Cease your meaningless speech, ninja. Where did you get that staff ? As it spoke, the QB leaned down so its face was as close to the bars as it could get without pressing up against them. Naruto looked down at the staff, surprised for a moment that it had followed him into the seal. It had never done that before. Then again, it had become such an integral part of his day he shouldn't be too surprised. He almost always had it on hand now. It was a gift from Master Chukaku. Realization dawned across the blonde's features as he suddenly looked up at the QB with a smirk. But you recognize it because it was the sage's, don't you ? He chuckled slightly to himself. At least it confirmed the validity of the temple's claims to its origins. The fox merely growled, a deep low sound that had Naruto's robes fluttering slightly in the breeze it created. How dare you hold that staff so carelessly? Naruto was actually a little frightened for once. The QB had always been menacing, but for the first time Naruto really felt the hatred coating his words, aimed directly at him. How dare you lay a hand on anything he touched, ninja? Naruto tried to remain calm against this new side of the QB, offering his usual serene smile, even though it was slightly strained. You know it is unhealthy to hold on to the past so vehemently. It is better to cherish memories than cling to them desperately. The fox's great eyes narrowed very dangerously as its claws began scraping at the bars separating them. Your preaching might work on Shukaku's container, but your meaningless words are nothing but wind in my ears. Naruto looked up, surprised at that while the fox returned to its somewhat normal, cold disposition, the staff forgotten for now. Don't look so surprised, ninja. My chakra leaking into your frail body gives me a limited understanding of what is going on outside. I could feel that pitiful Tanuki's presence before you even saw that boy. Naruto reined in his shock for the moment. The QB's words at least made sense. That's a strange way to address your kin. His response was a loud and rather vicious snort that made him crinkle his nose slightly. The QB had never been this close before, and up close his breath was not the most pleasant experience on Naruto's senses. The rest of my kind are beneath my notice, barely worth the attention their meaningless existences bring. Naruto eyed his head at that, wondering how anybody could be so callous about family. Maybe you should be glad you have family at all. Again the fox grunted in his direction, baring his teeth to show his displeasure. The moment I begin calling those weaklings my family is the moment I admit you are worthy of respect. From the tone of his voice, the QB obviously didn't think that was ever going to happen. Naruto just tapped the side of his head with the shakuju, causing the QB to flinch too subtly to see. You know, behind bars like this you don't look all that powerful yourself, you know. The great fox stared at him with unblinking red eyes, his glistening white teeth showing as its lips pulled back. I am a being far more powerful than you will ever hope to imagine. I am pure chakra given consciousness, power incarnate. Naruto just grinned at the fox, causing it to stop its rant for a moment. So you really are just made of pure chakra ? Good to know. And with that the blonde suddenly faded from the seal, the QB somehow feeling it had been played as it lay back down, not bothering to walk back into the darkness of the cell this time as a frown took up residence on its brow. Naruto cracked open his eyes just as somebody walked into the clearing, the ground at his feet twitching in a familiar way. It's good to see you made it, Gaara. The redhead just had his usual emotionless mask on, which Naruto didn't mind. It would take more than a few days to give Gaara some semblance of normality. It was not all that difficult to leave the village. This time Naruto did raise an eyebrow. He knew Gaara was powerful, if not in general then at least for his age, but leaving a shinobi village should never be that simple. Of course this was coming from the boy who actually walked straight out of Konoha. Sometimes he wondered just what those guards were doing that night. The village and its walls are built on and from sand. He offered no more for an explanation, so Naruto just shrugged. It hadn't taken all that much for Gaara to leave the village. He didn't particularly care for anything there. He had no relationships with his family. The people hated and feared him, and his own father had ordered his assassination countless times. For the sand-wielding Jinchuriki, it hadn't even taken a second thought. Naruto remembered how Matsuri had been when he told the girl he was leaving. He had never seen a more heartbroken look before. She had actually offered to come with him, and honestly the blonde was touched. He was sure with enough time and planning he could have gotten the girl out of sooner. However, she was in the academy. While not a shinobi, yet she would still be labeled as a missing nin due to her knowledge of certain key points about Suna's system and jutsu. Naruto didn't want her to have that kind of burden on her shoulders, so he simply told her that it was not the last time that they would see one another and she should work on growing stronger in his absence. It had been a rather teary-eyed farewell from the cute brunette, but Naruto had promised he would see her again, and he had never broken a promise yet. He never did see Temari again though, which was a shame. Even so, he believed he would see her again too. Finally he left his thoughts behind as he looked up at Gaara, his eyes twinkling at the challenge before him. Alright Gaara, let's get started. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.